All right. Well, welcome in, everyone. We are in the midst of the Bulls off season. And with that, we're going to be having some special guests on the channel. And that's starting today with truly a Bulls historian, the historian of the game of basketball. He's the author of the book, The Jordan Rules, among many others, featured in the documentary, The Last Dance, and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Pro Basketball Writers Association. And now the Bulls senior writer for Bulls.com. It is my pleasure to introduce to you back to the show, Sam Smith of Bulls.com. Sam, thanks for making the time, and it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. Good to talk to Bulls. There's nothing to see, so there's only discussion now.
Yeah. So now, for those watching, if you're not already, be sure to follow Sam on Twitter at Sam Smith Hoops. Check out his work on Bulls.com as well as his books. I definitely highly recommend The Jordan Rules. It's one of my favorites. Now, Sam, the last time I had you on the show, it was last offseason. It was before the Bulls went through free agency. It was before they brought in Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, before they drafted Ayo, before they moved on from Lauri Markkanen by way of a signing trade. So a completely new roster since we last spoke. And what started out as a great kickoff to the season, and really more just the start of the season, the Bulls were sitting at the top of the East by the All-Star break, completely fell off all the way to the 6th seed, getting beaten pretty badly in the playoffs. You've been covering the Bulls for a very long time. Have you ever seen a season like this where you see such a drastic shift in performance from the start of the season to the end? I mean, we kind of saw that in the 04-05, but in the reverse, where they struggled to start the season, they finished it really strong. But I think for Bulls fans, we're trying to figure out and rationalize what the heck happened. What's your perspective and rationale for the sudden fall in the season, and what can be learned from it?
I think, and I kind of like what they did, and I endorsed it. Not that they asked or cared whether I did or not. But as you know, the last 4 or 5 years rebuilding, which is always ugly. Fans say, "Oh, break it up," start over, draft, which is terrible. I hate it. Because the Cubs kind of did it and had some success. Well, say, yeah, the Cubs did it, so let's do it. But usually those things don't work. You got to get lucky. You got to get a star. Sacramento, how many years has been out of the play? You follow closely. What, 15 years or something? Minnesota was 15. Yeah, you get into that hole. If you don't get lucky in the lottery, LeBron kind of luck. You could be in that hole for a decade or more. So, I like when the new management came in. We haven't really seen that. To answer your question directly, I wander around in my answers, but the Bulls' philosophy basically, since the Reinsdorf group bought the team in '85 and Krause became GM, and then handed it over to Paxson, was essentially the same philosophy all the time. We're going to build through the draft. We're going to succeed, and it worked because of Jordan. The Bulls got lucky.
Right.
There was a lot of ways they couldn't have got, Portland doesn't take, Sam Bowie. Indiana doesn't trade the pick a couple of years before to get a center. They would have had number 2, would have taken Jordan, and so the Bulls get lucky, get Jordan, and, now you're in place to do it, and then you had, Pippen, Grant, what they did, and, turns into a championship. And, when people look back, it's always like, well, yeah, it was meant to be, but it wasn't. It was, they got good fortune. And then, Paxson came in and while, the landscape turned against him, he did a really good job at the beginning, but he did it through the draft. Initially, Kirk Heinrich, and really bad luck there. It looked like they were going to get Dwayne Wade. It probably would have meant a title. In the last minute, Riley switched off, famous story, switched off. He wanted a big man. Riley always believed you had to have a center first. I forgot the guy's name. He went to the Clippers. But he was going to take him and got talked out of it. Actually, Randy Fund, who was from Wheaton, was his coached it for him for a while, and followed him in LA, and then went to Miami with him, and pushed for Wade. But the Bulls, I remember that draft very vividly in '03, I think it was. They were sure they had Wade. I remember them talking about Wade for months before that draft. And that was the consensus going in. But still, the Heinrich, they did well. Ben Gordon, Noel Deng, and, built a 50-win kind of team. And, so anyway, this group came in with exactly the opposite philosophy. He's saying that, look, we don't have time. The community is alienated from what's happened the last 4 or 5 years. We don't have time to do that. We're going to push all our chips in the beginning. Veteran guy, they traded for Vucevic, 30 years old. They invested heavily in DeRozan. And so, it's like a sprinter starting a race, or a horse, that runs into the lead right at the beginning. And, at the quarter pole going out, the first quarter, you say, wow, they're beating everybody. But then eventually the talent catches up. And I think that's what happened to the Bulls. They pushed out early to try to get a head start on the season, get their credibility back with the community, which they did. The community liked what was going on, first place, possibilities, all that kind of stuff. And, now we say, well, injuries, if not injuries, but, COVID, but everybody had stuff, so right. That's valid, really. I think they just pushed harder than the other teams early on, to get their credibility, get attention, get noticed. And I think as a result, they got out pushed ahead, but then other teams, their guys played a lot. DeRozan played a lot. Vucevic played a lot. Other teams weren't playing. If you remember Milwaukee, yeah. I know you follow Giannis. I don't even think he played in the first month. And when he did play, it was like half speed. So a lot of guys were coming into the season tentatively, slowly, sort of taking their time, adjusting, coming off injuries, taking a lot of time. And the Bulls didn't. Everybody was playing, 40 minutes, 38, 37, big minutes, playing all through games. And I think I like I said, I liked what they did. I like, because maybe you can get some momentum from that, and maybe they have it, but then injuries hit. But I think my unscientific view is that's what happened. They were a thoroughbred who ran out ahead of the pack, but got caught because of the various circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is that it's the regular season is a marathon; it's not a sprint. And the really good teams, the title contending teams, know that, and so they approach it that way, and they really put their foot on the gas towards the end of the season. Whereas the Bulls, it was kind of the opposite. I did want to ask, we were talking about injuries, because I've seen a lot of Bulls fans on my channel anyway, really clinging onto this idea that, well, if Lonzo Ball had been healthy, or even Caruso for that matter, because he missed quite a bit of time as well, the season wouldn't have transpired the way that it did. And while I do think not having Lonzo certainly impacted the Bulls' overall performance down the stretch, I have a hard time really thinking that Lonzo Ball alone was saving this team from the free fall that went through the rest of the season and would have kept them at the top of the Eastern Conference had they just stayed healthy. What's your perspective on that?
Well, let's say if that's the case, Lonzo really got screwed by not being a contender for most valuable player in the league. Yeah, he was valuable and was important for the way they played, because for how many years now they haven't had a point guard. And the offseason, I remember every fan, I'm sure we talked about it, last year, every fan was, coming into last year free agency, the priority was get a point guard. DeRozan fell in their lap. It wasn't like they were, came into free agency and said, yeah, let's focus on DeMar DeRozan. Yeah. It was, and in fact, I think they were penalized for it, like 10 minutes after free agency started, Ball had signed. But, it's sort of fait accompli. New Orleans didn't want him back. He really didn't, have, Knicks, it made a mistake, but, they went for the local guy, Kemba Walker, and, so whatever. So, they had a runway to him, and yes, it would have helped. But if you remember when he was playing too, he was sort of an every other game guy. One game he'd shoot 5 for 7 and 3. The next game he was 0 for 8 on threes. Yeah. And so it would have helped, but it's asking a lot to suggest all our guys have to be healthy, for us to have success, because no team, Jimmy Butler missed 25 games. The center Abayo missed 30 games. I mean, Miami missed way more games than the Bulls guys missed. Right. And they finished first. And that's the idea of a long regular season, of having a bench. And I mean, that was one of the problems. They loaded up in the starting lineup, Lonzo, 20 million, DeMar, 25, whatever, Vucevic, and they had no bench.
Right.
And really, that turned out to be, a real weakness, that when guys got hurt or when guys get out, they had guys who tried hard. They had guys who worked hard, but they didn't have anyone who could score. Coby White some, but he was coming off. He didn't play all summer, recuperating, started the season late, and so there's a lot to ask to say, okay, Coby, you haven't played in 6 months, now come in and save us.
Right.
And so, but again, like I said, I agreed with what they did. It seems to me, if you coming into last summer and say, look, I don't know what's going to happen after 82 games, but they're going to be in the playoffs. They're not going to be in the play-in, and they're going to be, a 45 to 50 win team. I think most Bulls fans would have taken that.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing, right? I've talked about this with a few others as well. Is it's like I predicted that the Bulls would probably finish between 45 and 47 wins, and that was an optimistic view. Like I was saying, I'll be ecstatic if the Bulls do that. And they did that, right? And they made the playoffs. I thought they'd be the 5th seed, and 6th seed, whatever it's at that point. But it's like, I think it's just the way that the season ended that left a sour taste in Bulls' mouths. Right. But I think at the same time,
there were two issues. One was the way it ended, and the other, the big flaw was the record against good teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those two are real negatives. That you can't be a high-level contending team if you can't beat the other contending teams.
Right.
Some games were close and all, but you can't have that record against good teams.
Well, and it's funny because I think like even when the Bulls were in their, lowest years of rebuilding, they were beating some of those contending teams, here and there, 1 or 2 wins. It's like every night, you would expect some teams to have an off night and some teams to have a good night, but they just couldn't beat any of them.
Maybe, to its credit, over the season, sometimes good teams don't take a bad team seriously.
Right.
That team sneaks out a win.
Sure.
At least to their credit, they had 3 all-star players. LaVine, DeRozan, and Vucevic are highly regarded around the league. So I think teams took them a little more seriously. So, that's a positive. It ended up more losses, but the league started taking them seriously, and that's what they needed. And, like I said before, from the last 4 years, to me, the success of the season was that the league forgot that the Bulls were an afterthought and no longer were an afterthought. And that's a big step, and that's a hard step to take.
Yeah. Let's talk about this playoff series really quick. I don't think many people, even most optimistic Bulls fans, thought that the Bulls were going to win the series. Most had the Bucks in 4 or 5, but I do think based on the way that the Bulls came out in those first 2 games, playing a high level of energy, playing locked in defense, not looking at all like the team that ended the regular season that was in a free fall. Of course, the Bulls won a surprising game in game 2, but then followed it up with 3 straight, frankly, embarrassing losses, 2 really bad losses on their own home floor. Were you surprised at all how the series transpired? Because in a way, the series was almost sort of indicative of how the regular season went, Yeah,
maybe I was a little more. I thought because of those 3 players in the regular season, they were capable of winning 50 games, and they came close. If not for the collapse at the end, they were there. I thought they would lose in the playoffs, but I thought it would be. I had Milwaukee in 6.
Okay.
I thought they could get a game in Milwaukee, and they did. I thought they would get a game in Chicago. Really, that those 2 games in Chicago were one of the most disappointing playoff series sequences I've seen in my life. It was unbelievable to lose like that and to be out of those games. And I think, I don't know, but I think it was instructive in a way. Management didn't say anything, and they were positive at the end, but they had to look at that and say, well, we got some problems.
Yeah.
You can't let that happen. Milwaukee's not the 96 Bulls. They were a good team.
Yeah. And they were without Middleton too.
Right. Middleton was out, and they play in Wes Matthews and Bobby Portis and, got solid players, but these are not big time stars.
Right.
You can't lose like that, and so I think it was helpful, you know, it was painful, but I think it might be helpful toward, you know, maybe they're not going to be fooled by this, like you were saying, the fans saying, yeah, if only we had Lonzo, you know, we're in Grant Park. I think the playoffs said to them, no, we got some problems. We got some problems more than Lonzo getting healthy. And maybe that's good because, you know, I've read some comments this week from the Atlanta GM. You know, they made the conference finals and said, hey, you know, we're going to be in the finals. We're going to win a title next year. You know, and they barely were a 500 team.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the play-in, they wouldn't have even made the playoffs.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, you know, as bad as it was and as painful as it was and uncompetitive as it was, they were not competitive in any way. Now, part of the problem is they play too many young guys. Can't play young guys in the playoffs as much as everybody loved Io, and he wasn't ready to play. You can't put him in there 35 minutes in the playoffs against real men. You know, Tex Winter, I've quoted the line many times, you know, when Jerry Krause would come in and say, you know, Jerry loved the draft. We're going to draft this guy, that guy. Tex Winter would say, Jerry, you win with men. You don't win with kids. You can't put these guys in playoff conditions against experienced men and say, you know, do it. They can't. It's not fair to them. It's not. It's not right, really. And so,
well, you say that, but
they overused him, you know, and he probably wore out quite a bit. But you just can't be that uncompetitive in the playoffs.
Well, you say that, and I agree with you. But Patrick Williams actually showed up decently well in the playoffs, I felt. I mean, it wasn't, you know, a stellar performance by any means, but for a younger guy who missed most of the season, especially in the last couple of games, he actually did fairly well. But I get what you're saying. I mean, you need the experience going into the playoffs.
I don't totally agree with that because they were down 30 when he did all this stuff.
Yeah, sure. At garbage time. Yeah.
You know, that one game when he had 20, I mean, I'm giving him a break because he's 20 and he missed half the season. I didn't expect anything from him. I didn't even think he's going to play. But he did nothing in the first half. They were down by 30, and then he got 18 points.
Well, I mean, but then the other thing is
he got no rebounds.
Yeah,
he played 35 minutes with no rebounds. You can't do that.
But the Bulls didn't really have a ton of options, though.
You got to be you should be hitting the head with 3 rebounds if you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
So I'm not you know, negative on him. I'm just saying again, don't be fooled by he's arrived now. You know, okay, we're set at power forward.
Oh, for sure. Agreed.
20 points. I feel, you know, he was put in over his head again, you know, because they didn't have many options. And you know, again, that's what we were talking about. They front loaded the team and they really didn't have an opportunity to do the bench much. And I don't fault them for that, but you know, those guys got caught up in it. But I think Patrick has potential, but I don't judge a player on getting 20 points when they're down 30.
I mean, that's fair. Let's talk about the offseason, because you're saying, you know, those embarrassing playoff losses kind of set into the front office. Like, okay, we've got really bigger problems than just missing Lonzo Ball and it being an injury factor. And I want to talk about the offseason because this is going to be a critical offseason for the Bulls as they try to address the holes and the gaps that exist. There are 2 players I want to focus on in particular. And I want to start with the most obvious, and Zach LaVine is going to be an unrestricted free agent. It's the most talked about topic among Bulls fans and the media. What's Zach going to do? Are the Bulls going to offer him a max contract? Is he worth a max contract? You obviously had a chance, you know, to ask questions in all the Bulls end of season exit interviews. And Zach was pretty non-committal when asked about what his thoughts were going into free agency, what he's expecting, what factors he'll be considering. He even asked, or when he was asked, if the Bulls are the leader when it comes to decision going forward. And he just continued emphasizing he's going to be approaching free agency with an open mind. Of course, you kind of expect those type of answers to the media to not, you know, really give up any leverage that they have going into free agency. But what was your impression of Zach's exit interview, and what do you think ultimately is going to happen as it relates to his free agency decision?
Yeah, I'm not a customer of social media much, so I'm unaware of some of this stuff. But I did hear, you know, that there was this outcry, and I was shocked. You know, I thought Zach answered exactly like I would answer. I don't know. I'm non-committal is the answer.
Yeah.
It's a business deal. What's he supposed to come in and say? Yeah, my life is over if I can't re-sign with the Bulls. Forget other 29 teams. He's a free agent for the first time, basically unrestricted in his career. Probably, maybe, never again if he is. 5 years from now, he's 32, 33,
Right.
So I believed him when he said, look, I really, I don't know. I'm sure he's thought about different, possibilities, but nobody's been able to present him with a proposal. So, to me, it was, he said exactly what I expected him to say. And I've been a big advocate of Zach's for a long time. In fact, when they made the trade, I'm sure I wrote, because I'd seen him play, and you never know when, what injury, Derrick Rose and everything. But I said, if he comes back and plays like he did before, he's equal to Jimmy Butler. This is an all-star player. This is a fabulous athlete. Guy can shoot, tremendous skills. I never understood, some of the community, I wouldn't say negative, but community questions about it. I think he's a big-time player. I think well worth the maximum deal. I think I think the Bulls would offer them that. And I mean, to me, I don't see the big issue. I shouldn't say big issue. It's not my money. It's easy to say, give somebody, maximum deal, but you got to pay somebody. So, and the other thing, the way the NBA works, if you don't pay them, you don't, it's not a slot system, as you know. You got to get under the cap. So Bulls don't get under the cap if they don't pay them. Maybe what, 15 million under? 14, yeah. That's what Bobby Portis turned down 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, so you maybe can't even replace him with an NBA bench player. So it makes sense on both sides for him to want to take a deal with the Bulls and the Bulls to want to give him the deal. Now, if the Bulls wanted to address other needs and say sign and trade, those things are possible. I have no idea about that, whether Zach is interested, whether they're interested, but I think he's worth it. I think he's a great talent. He's not the upper level, but the upper level guys are out of the playoffs. Kevin Durant's out of the playoffs. LeBron didn't even make the play-in. Yeah. Russell Westbrook, MVP. Now he's like bargain basement stuff. So I think Zach's a valuable player. I think he's well worth it. I think he's a great talent, and I think the Bulls are fortunate to have him now. Because they've got, as we've discussed, because they have all these other holes, and Arturas is very creative based on last summer. I give them a lot of credit because the prior managements, even though I think they did good things, Krause obviously 6 titles, and Paxson built, whether they like him or not, he built 2 50-win type 60-win teams. I mean, the Bulls led the league in wins 2 years in a row. And they lost out on LeBron, Wade, and Bosh in free agency, and put together a team that had a better record than Miami. So anyway, but that was done. These guys were very creative with signing trades and additions and adding. I think they did a brilliant job. I think, Arturas, should be a high candidate for executive of the year, no matter how the season ended, because of what they did last summer. I mean, they turned, as we said, as I said, they turned a team that nobody was even, basically Sacramento or Orlando into a contender, at the All-Star break in first place. I mean, that's with the personnel moves they made. So that said, I think they're capable of being very creative. So I don't know, what that creativity will be and how it'll affect Zach. But I think, from Zach's point of view and the Bulls' point of view, because if he would walk away, he would sign a deal for $50 million less. Yeah. And they make a lot of money, but it's still $50 million.
Well, that's the other, question I was going to ask was, the Bulls actually have quite a bit of leverage in this scenario. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. You've been around the business for much longer than I have. You've obviously been much closer to it than I have. But because Zach would be leaving so much money on the table, who's to say that they couldn't offer even slightly less than the max to add a little bit more cap flexibility? Say something like, 5 years, 175 million as an example, instead of the 212. And maybe that, isn't the approach the right way to go, because you don't want to tarnish a relationship that you have with Zach LaVine by not giving him the max and putting him in a situation where it's like, well, you either take this or you can go to another team. And that's still going to be less than what you would make, with this amount. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
If we're me, he can make 160 somewhere else. If my team offered me 5 and 180, goodbye. Thanks. Appreciate it. But that's not good business, because you can trade that deal. That's not hamstringing your deal. If you want to do something with it down the road, you can. Maybe they want to do a shorter deal. Maybe he'd want to do a shorter deal. Get free agency again in 2 years. You never know. LeBron's been doing that. A lot of the top players have been doing that. Wanting. And that's been a thing in the NBA now, that we just assume he wants 5 years and $200 million. He may want 2 years, and
to have another free agency 2 years from now.
Maybe he wants to play with LeBron's son. You never know. You never know. And now he's represented by LeBron's agency, so there's always a lot of mysteries going on. Where they want to build teams, put their guys together in different spots. So that's possible, and from the Bulls standpoint, maybe they would say, that gives us more flexibility. DeRozan's up in 2 years, Vucevic is up in a year, maybe we can go get Jokic then, But, you never, I tell you, one thing I do know, these guys sit around and go through as many scenarios as you and I do, and play the trade machine and what if, and they do it all day long, really. I mean, that's why it's such a great job.
Yeah. Go ahead. The one thing I was going to ask was, the other thing that people speculate on is who's going to be staying, with this team versus who's going to be, coming back. Outside of Zach, you have a few guys set to be free agents: Derrick Jones Jr., Troy Brown Jr., Tristan Thompson, Matt Thomas. I think all of them are, personally, I'd be surprised if any of them were to be re-signed. But the player a lot of people are talking about, and the other guy I wanted to talk to you about, is Coby White, and the likelihood of him still being in a Bulls uniform next season, given the crowded backcourt, the fact that Zach most likely, like we just talked about, is probably going to be re-signing with the Bulls. I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't. Also, the rise of Ayo. What do you think are the chances of Coby returning next season? Of course, because it would have to be done through a trade. And what do you think Coby could fetch in a potential trade package?
Well, I don't think his value is that high now. I think, because he came off a summer where he couldn't work out and started the season late, and then was kind of yanked around. He's starting, he's off the bench, he's point guard, he's shooting guard. I think, it contributed to his inconsistency. So I think he needs to see, he's extension eligible. I'm sure they're not going to give him an extension. He's 3 years. Let him play another year. Then he becomes a restricted free agent. And again, you need help on the bench. I would keep him. I don't see that. Unless there's something that comes up. Say Coby plus gets you this that you need. The three needs I feel they need is an athletic big, a backup.
Yeah.
7-footer. I think you can get that through the draft. I'm not a draft expert. I don't watch college ball, until it comes closer to the draft, then I watch stuff. But I was just looking at some of these mock drafts, and there's several 7-foot athletic kind of guys. I think you can get one of those kind of guys in the draft. They need a spot up shooter, as Milwaukee really exposed, collapsed it in the lane, shutting everything off. That one game they shot 50 something threes and they missed, 40 of them or something.
Yeah.
They need, a Bruce Bowen, corner 3 type, Max Strus they had for a while, all these guys Miami has. Somebody like that, but you could pick up, Miami's got 3 of them who aren't even drafted, and I think you can find a guy like that.
Yeah.
And then we all hope Lonzo's okay, but you can't count on it. You can't be sure. And the other thing is, whatever he does this summer to improve himself, he's never really played a full season without something happening. So you got to have some sort of a point guard, a veteran point guard. Again, I thought it was unfair to ask Ayo to do all that stuff. Be the point guard, shooter. I think you need a veteran penetrating, point guard. And I think that took Vooch out of a lot of stuff, because they basically had a turnover running the offense to DeRozan and LaVine.
Right.
And they're not naturally looking to pass the ball. They're looking to shoot it.
Right.
And so I think, Vucevic suffered from that. He never would say anything, but I think he just wasn't getting the ball in good opportunities a lot because he really didn't have a real point guard to play with, and so maybe they'll, that's a lot of stuff to get, and given the payroll they've got, maybe they can't. But I think you got to improve the bench, and I don't see how you improve it by getting rid of Coby White. He's still shot almost 40% on threes in not a great season. So I would keep him.
I remember when I actually asked you about Coby White the last time we met, and obviously this was before we got Lonzo, before Io was drafted, and I said, is it premature of us to say that Coby White cannot be that point guard for the future for the Bulls? Because obviously the discussion was, who are the Bulls going to bring in as their starting point guard in free agency? And I was like, well, why can't that be Coby White? And you said, it's not premature. Coby's never going to be that guy. A lot of it has to do with the fact that he can't handle pressure, and he's probably more of that role that's a scoring spark off of the bench. I agree with you. The only thing that I have a hang up on is Coby White's consistency. Throughout the time that he's been in the NBA, he's just been a very inconsistent player. Granted, he's young. This was his third season in the league. He missed a lot of the season. So I don't know. For me, I view it as one of those things where if Lonzo comes back healthy, Caruso comes back healthy, you also have Io, you're going to see a player like Io or Coby, one of them is going to lose minutes as a result. If I had to choose one, I'd probably take Io because I feel that he's a more well-rounded player as it relates to his defensive abilities. But I don't know. I think I want to see Coby do well, but I struggle to see him being with this team long-term, at least the way that they've structured it. But I do think it's interesting. You're talking about like a Coby plus to get something that they really need, because Coby's value, his trade value is just not really that high right now. Right.
I think they need the scoring aspect. I think Io will be fine at some point, but he's not a scorer. If
the outside shooting in general,
he won't shoot the ball. I've never seen him take a contested shot.
Yeah.
And so, you can't have that. Coby will shoot,
Right.
I think he's inconsistent because of the way he's been used. And like you said, what they didn't have a lot of choices because of the circumstances. But if you remember, even his rookie year, they tried to make him a point guard. Boylan was there. All of a sudden he's a point guard, and we're all watching and saying, well, he might be a good point guard, except he can't dribble.
Right.
And so you're forcing him, and he's a good kid, will do whatever he's asked, and he tried, and they kept trying to shoehorn him into stuff that he wasn't, because he said, well, we need a point guard, so let's make him the point guard. And so I don't think he's ever really had a consistent role. I'd like to see, if they can enhance the bench a little bit, then put him in a role. I mean, he's the only guy coming off that bench who's good, can get hot and get you like 5 threes. Nobody else can do that. You gotta have a player like that. And so unless you can like combine him with something like you say and say improve somewhere else, I would be reluctant to say, we don't need this guy.
Yeah.
I think you do need that guy unless you could upgrade that shooting somewhere else. And the other thing too, we love Caruso. We love the way he plays. But when you play that way, you're going to get hurt when you weigh 175 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of God bless the guy, everything he does. But if you're throwing yourself at people like that all the time, it's like the concussion he got. Right. He didn't have to make that play. He like jumped over somebody into somebody, and that's what made him so good. And that's what enabled and got him in the contract and, got him in the NBA, basically. He was undrafted G League player. But, if you're going to turn yourself into human torpedo, you're not going to play 82 games. And so you got to have other guys who are going to come in, and so, play for him. And so those are the things to me you got to prepare for.
So I'll get you out of here on this one, Sam, because I know we're coming up on time. Quick question for a quick answer. Who do you think, or what do you think, I should say, will be the biggest surprise move of the offseason for the Bulls?
DeMar DeRozan. It was a big surprise.
No, I'm saying for this upcoming offseason.
No, I know.
What do you think will be the biggest surprise?
It was a big surprise last year. We had no idea.
Yeah.
It's great in a sense because, I'm like you. I think these guys are very creative, and I think they recognize because of the end of the season and the playoffs that, while the fans may think, we get Lonzo and, Phoenix is in trouble. I don't think they look at it that way. So I think they're looking at it like, we got stuff to do, and they're creative, and so I don't know what to I mean one thing, if it's me, I might say I'd sign Zach and trade DeMar. He just had the best season of his career. He ain't having a season like that again. No offense. He ain't averaging 28 points and making every game winner he takes.
Yeah.
So,
you're not the first person.
I'm not advocating to trade him, but I'm just saying.
No, I know.
These guys might look at it and say, there's an old saying in sports: better to trade a guy 1 year too soon than 1 year too late.
Yeah.
Don't fall in love with your guys. Recognize their value. And, if teams look at DeMar like, he's going to average 30 points and make every game winner, heck, maybe they can get a lot for him.
I don't think there's any chance that the Bulls do that, but I will say you're not the first person I've heard say that, right? I know you said you're not advocating to trade DeRozan, but there is something to be said about a guy that just had one of the best seasons of his career at the age of 32. You'd have to think he's not going to come back 33, 34 and kind of have the same type of season.
Right.
Yeah, you trade him when his trade value high. I get it. But
again, like I said, but they could look at it like that, and say, hey, we pulled off a coup. We got this guy when nobody wanted him. Now, he's going to be all league player. He was in the MVP discussion all year.
Yeah.
He became one of the most, well-regarded, the All-Star break. There was more stories on LeBron, on DeMar DeRozan than they were on LeBron James.
Yeah.
It was amazing. So this guy's profile increased so much that maybe they'll look at it and say, we can get more for this guy than we can get for anybody else.
Right.
So that's why I say I think it's going to be, they may end up, just signing Zach and do nothing and say, let's run it back again. Lonzo will save us. But I tend to think that they're going to look, they're going to be creative again. And whether they can, be successful at it, it's another thing.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to look at a lot of options because they, to me, that's what they demonstrated, that we're not management that's going to sit still.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I really do want to thank you again for taking the time. It really does mean a lot to me as well as my audience for you taking the time out of your day to share your insights and thoughts with us Bulls fans. Keep up the great work on Bulls.com and hope you're able to enjoy some time off in the off season.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not doing anything till September.
Sounds good. All right. Well, take care, Sam. You have a good one.
All right. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. Have a good one.
All right. Good to talk to you.
Yeah.